It's amazing to meet you again, Robert. How have you been?
I have had a busy week, Mushtak, but a brilliant week.
That's really good to hear. Today, I thought we can talk about a topic that's close to our hearts: higher education, degrees, and the values of degrees. And what really sort of get my attention to this topic is a recent British social attitude survey that shows that 34% of British people think degrees are not worth the time and money. And this is actually a big rise from the 14% of the British people who thought degrees are useless in 2005. So within 21 years, there are more people in Britain who think degrees are not worth the time and the money spent on them. Of course, this is a topic that both you and I are part of it because we work at universities and we have our own opinions. So first, before we dig any deeper, I'm sure you read the survey and you know about it, but I want to know what do you think about it and how does this survey make you feel?
It makes me feel slightly uneasy about a messy, slightly inarticulate, if I'm honest, conversation about something really important. And so you may have to stop me because I've got so many things that I would want to say in response. But let's start with when you and I went to university, long before we worked in universities. I think we both share a commitment to the idea that universities are amazing, special, transformative places, and the education and the research that they do is just a magical, precious thing. So that's the first point, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second point for me would be that we have lived through a period when we've worked in universities, when university education has been monetized and commercialized. And so I had the privilege of going to university in Scotland when there was no fees and there were grants to support students from a range of backgrounds. And so these days in large parts of the world, in Malaysia where you're based, in the UK, not in Scotland, but in the rest of the UK, where fees are applied, and the same is true in America and elsewhere. And because of that, I think we have taken a generation or generations actually of student learners, and they are becoming more aware of the balance of the relationship between what have I paid for this education and therefore what did I get for this education. And so then you need some kind of balanced scorecard mentality as to what is going on here. Because definitely what education at university did for me was it broadened my horizons. It gave me time to grow from being a school student who was being taught in a very structured way to a learner who gradually began to engage in subjects that you were interested in with ideas that were at the cutting edge of your field. And as you and I transition from taught programs to research degrees, you become part of that research community. So there's a growth there, which I don't think has some monetary value. I'll come back to that in a second, but it has emotional, spiritual, philosophical value, and that it makes you a broader, better thinker. So then if I say something about the how do you value that, then there are different narratives at play in that survey and counter surveys. So there's really strong research evidence, I think, in the UK, if I talk just about the UK, that a university education is actually quite a good investment because not only does your salary and kind of income across your whole of your working career is higher, that your health outcomes are better, that your socioeconomic status and your well-being in lots of ways are better for being a graduate than not being a graduate. So on the one hand, you've got this sense in which people say, well, these degrees are not worth the investment. And if I was really careful as a researcher and went back to a transcript of this conversation, I think you said slightly flippantly that more people in the UK now say these degrees are worthless. And then you said more carefully, which is probably closer to the survey question, which is, are they worth it? So is the fee worth the investment? And so the idea that they're worthless, I think, is a deeply problematic idea because education is definitely not, in my view, worthless. But there's a whole section of the UK community who've never been to university who are being asked a question about the value of something they've never experienced. So I would contest the phrase that they're worthless. I empathise with the idea that you are making an investment, and so now in large parts of the UK and all of Malaysia, you pay a fee to go to university, and so you have to make some return on that investment. But I do think that the return on that investment is very narrowly framed as, well, if I pay this many thousand ringgits or this many £1,000, what do I get at the end of it? And because the economy is under such pressure globally for reasons which have nothing to do with university education, I think the nature of the jobs market and the nature of the health of the economy are in a depressed place and a changing place, respectively. That means that graduates are genuinely worried they won't walk straight into a graduate level job. But if you look at the businesses which are rampantly successful, they're often people who were studied and educated in something and ended up doing something completely different. And you can't really say that there was a direct line from I trained in this thing to I ran this kind of business and I earned a certain amount of money. And I'll close by then connecting that back to one of our recurring themes. If you're a map reader and you do a type of degree at university to become a medic or a lawyer or an engineer or a scientist, and you want to go into a very structured career, then the maths around how much do I have to invest to have access to a level of income from this career structure. Let's say you want to become a teacher. You can go to university, qualify as a teacher, earn a certain amount of money, and at some point in your working life, you've paid back the debt that you incurred to become a teacher, and it's a profitable investment. So if you frame it exclusively in economics, you could say that either works or doesn't work. So is the investment worth it is the same way as buying this stock or share or this property or this product, is it worth it? But for other people, if you're a map maker, you might train as a teacher, go off and do something, start a business in the food or drink sector, launch a chain of restaurants that have a particular niche in the world and go on to become a billionaire. Or the business could fail and you could say, well, was it worth it? And it's a very different framing. So it depends on whether you're going into a career structure where there's high predictability about future income or whether you plan to make your own future. So that was a really long answer because it's a thing I feel really quite strongly about, Mushtak.
Well, I feel equally strongly, and I was a bit provocative the way I framed the question, of course, and it is not very comfortable for me to be the devil's advocate, because just like you, education has changed my life, and I've seen it changing the lives of many people. But I think without we stress testing this, the conversation wouldn't be very interesting. So let me go further. So I think what you are saying is, if the education actually goes on to help people find about themselves, be more interesting and interested human beings, then that is so valuable regardless. But at the same time, are we really confident? Are we sure that majority of the hundreds of thousands of universities around the world are really delivering that promise of actually raising the level of critical thinking and creativity and building these skills that are so important for life? Or maybe they are not. See, you see, there was a time where if you get a degree in X or Y or Z, you could at least be guaranteed a job, at least, even if you are not necessarily the most engaged citizen after your studies. But now we see these jobs are being threatened and being automated and all of that. So just like you, I believe the role of education is not to prepare people to become effective workers in the economy. I see it as it's about preparing effective citizens in the community. And part of the effectiveness of you as a citizen is to be productive and to be able to get gainful either employment or be able to add value in a different way so that you could make a very good living. And that is really the bigger role, which is bigger than just employability of the degree. So I go back to where I start because, again, my question is becoming too long, I'm noticing. How many of us as universities and university professors around the world really are doing the bit that you received and changed your life and maybe I received and was transformative compared to those who are more towards maybe the commercialized sort of end of the spectrum, which actually maybe led to the perception that resulted in the survey?
So let's start with the observation that you and I both went to university and trained to be engineers, and we are not doing engineering. So it's a case study, a sample of 2, but our sample says 100% of people who go to university end up doing something weird and wonderful as a result of it. Now, I'm sure that's a very biased sample, but not everybody who trains in something ends up making their money doing that something. And yet it has this powerful effect on it. You're still an engineer whilst you're in a leadership role in university and an educator, and you've done all kinds of interesting things since. So I would first of all say that the education has its own intrinsic value. It helps shape the way you think. Secondly, I would say that if you think in a very long time frame about universities, I think we are both in danger because of the age we are of thinking of a bit just before we went to university, which is you went to university and you were pretty much guaranteed a job as an accountant, an engineer, a nurse, a scientist, because that's the way the economy was. So few people went to university that if you were qualified in something that had any kind of professional standards body associated with it, you passed through a one-way doorway into this restricted community of the only people who could be chartered accountants or medics and the professions in universities have changed the way in which universities operate. But there's a bit before that, in fact, there's centuries before that, and then there's a bit after that, and there's only a few decades after that for you and I. So in the decades that you and I have been working in universities, it's no longer a guarantee because the economy has changed and there might be other ways in which you could become a qualified accountant or physiotherapist or teacher or nurse or whatever. And then, of course, the economy has also changed because there are not necessarily the same numbers of those jobs as some businesses boom and some businesses bust. And AI and generative AI in particular is changing the need for those kinds of skills. So the guarantee is no longer there. That doesn't change the intrinsic value. And if you look back to the centuries before you and I could even begin to conceive of what universities were, people went there for the sheer joy of being engaged in ideas. And the boundary between research and teaching was not nearly as fixed as it is in the modern higher education world. So you and I both have an overlapping connection to one of the most amazing people ever to live and one of the most amazing Scottish people ever to live, Adam Smith, the father of modern economics. And our overlapping connection is that I've twice worked at University of Glasgow, where he was both a student and a professor. And you and I have worked at, and you still work at, Heriot Watt, who owns his last remaining residence, Panmure House. Now, when Adam Smith went to university, he didn't go to university in order to become a something. He went to university because he was really a curious person and wanted to know more about the ideas that shaped the world. And then he went and he studied and he went off on a bit of a tour and thought amazing things and wrote books and ended up working as a tax inspector. He didn't go to do a degree in tax inspecting. That's what he ended up making a living doing, whilst he was also shaping the Scottish Enlightenment and writing these books that changed the nature of world order, I would argue. So that's what it was like originally. And when he was a student, that was his experience. And then when he was a staff member, he did things he was genuinely interested in. He didn't run courses to train you to become a something or other. And so I think there's a slight slippage that's happened, which is as our university sector has become more commercialized, Our student population are therefore approaching it in a more commercialised sense of thinking of return on investment and certainty about future career prospects. And just because there was a potential implied criticism of the tens of thousands of universities and university professors who are maybe not teaching the intrinsic value of education, we're in a dance with each other that our students want to know this is definitely going to work and lead me to a job. So we teach in ways which foreground employability and work experience. And, I think some of the way in which universities have reacted have been because of that dynamic. It's not that universities have, in isolation, decided to place less importance on personal development and personal growth. I think that's because of the financial pressure.
Well, I actually, I'm in agreement with you. As a matter of
In one of
fact,
these episodes, we're going to have to disagree just once.
well, yes, we will. I'm sure there'll be some. We'll find that. But I just wanted to say, actually, I have no qualms with the return on investment. I think probably the failure that's happening is it's in the map making or the map reading or around the map itself. I think universities need to clearly frame the experience that is given is life transforming, not because it's turning you from someone who did not know about accounting to a person who knows what is a debit and what's credit and knows the financial statement, but because it can give you the experience that Adam Smith had and how curious he was and how this led to the great things that he was working on. And I think in many universities, this work of you exploring yourself and hopefully doing something great and meeting great people is almost left to chance because it happens on the peripheries. Not every student chooses to go and join a club or a society and do all that very interesting work, because some are under even pressure from their parents to focus on the academic endeavor, which is important. But I think for now, we as universities and professors, we really need to go and make the case that while we don't know the shape or the nature of the future of jobs in a changing world, we know a lot about how the human brain works. We know a lot about the human psychology, and the pressures under which the young people are. And we really need to go and realize that promise, because there's a promise, when you go to university, that you will achieve your potential. I think every university in the world, if you go to their website, they will say something around, we are helping people achieving their full potential. And I believe some do actually end up achieving their full potential or close to, but I don't see that universities are actually doing the work to make this experience sort of quality assured for each and every student. One of the reasons, because we as human beings, we are so different from each other, and it's very difficult to achieve the to quality assure the potential fulfillment. It's much easier to quality assure that integration by parts, or algebra, or thermodynamics. This is much easier to quality assure. We know how to do it. And that probably, I'll just talk a little bit about this, because I'm as you know, very passionate about helping my students find their purpose. And that work that I started at Heriot-Watt University, where every one of my students, we started it a decade ago. Every one of my students, when they start their journey with us, we put them through a 4-week process where they will be articulating their superpower, their sense of purpose, and also the actions that they intend to do to mobilize that purpose into a positive impact on the world. And because of that work, they are becoming better engineers and better actuaries and better accountants, not any less. As a matter of fact, they are even getting better jobs. And I think that is the bit I feel that universities are struggling with, parents are struggling with, because everybody is looking for a map. Everybody is looking. The question that I'm asked most of the time, tell me which degree should my son or daughter do so that I can be assured that they will be getting a job. And I think this is the wrong question. This is the wrong map. This is entirely the wrong framing. So that's actually the I think that we are saying the same thing, but we're trying to make this conversation hopefully useful to potential students or the parents or even a teacher who is supporting them.
So you're too modest to say so, but I'll say so on your behalf. That work which you've led at Heriot-Watt, particularly Heriot-Watt Malaysia, that takes something which is often a side of desk or marginal or in my spare time thing and makes it systemic. So you're able to say that for 10 years, every student goes through that process of having to think and reflect and then to connect the content of their learning about actuarial maths or whatever their degree subject is to their purpose, so that they are in charge of writing a story about their own future. And so that happens in other universities too, but it happens much more informally and for some students, but not for other students. And if I was really honest, I suspect increasingly it happens for fewer students because of the performance and financial pressure that they are under to do well. And if I look at the difference between your university, where I also used to work, and my current university, roughly half of our students are the first in their family to go to university. And so the very act of getting into university and then staying in university is more challenging, and they have less by way of peer group support and resource and experience on which they can draw. And so it makes it harder for students in those circumstances where they are maybe working outside of university to keep themselves afloat financially and struggling with the step up to university level education and may have caring responsibilities and so on and so on. It's then harder to bake in unless it's part of the curriculum, unless it's mandatory and systemic. It's nice, but it's not necessarily the thing you're going to focus all of your spare time on because you're so focused on trying to get the qualification. And I think if we go back to this idea that I introduced, which is if you look at universities over the centuries that they've existed, in the early part and for a long period of time, there was definitely an elitism because, not everybody got to go to university. But for those that did go, there was much less pressure, and being at university was just a thing in itself. Whereas in the modern era, although there are many, many more universities and much wider pathways and access into universities, there are significant pressures on what you do when you are at university. And unless it's made part of the mandatory curriculum, my concern would be that whilst that opportunity is still there, and whilst the success stories that you do hear about of someone who did some volunteering or did something unusual or joined a student society and then used some of that to translate to some other context and had a really successful outcome, which could be financial but could also be social, or there's more than money at play. But those really great success stories are the unusual stories, not the systematic and everyday stories.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Actually, when people ask me, where is the innovation in that work we did in purpose? I say the innovation is not in the importance of purpose. Everybody knew that. Innately, they knew it. But the innovation was in making it systematic so that it's 100% of the students have to go through it. It's not 99%, not those who have the leadership potential. Everyone has to go through it. And I think this will increasingly become very, very important. So I wanted to probably focus the last bit of our conversation on one or two things. So the first thing is, what is the counter narrative? Because as you could imagine, this survey that we talked about captured the news because it says, degree, are they worth it? Or some people, they become more provocative, like what I tried to do and say, okay, 1 in 3 people think the degrees are worthless or things like that, which is not exactly what the survey said, as you so rightfully pointed out. But the question that I'm asking myself and you is, first of all, what should we do to counter that? Because this is a very dangerous narrative. Just imagine a young person who's just finishing high school and hears this and say, oh, everybody thinks these degrees are not really useful, so let me just go and do something else and maybe start earning money immediately. And the other thing is, what advice do we give to parents and those who support the young people as they make their their way through life and maybe reach university? Because I think these are very important things. We need to own the narrative, but also support people as they make their decisions.
So I'm going to just playfully suggest a few things we could do. First of all, we could say, well, you're right. Sorry. Thanks. Secondly, we could engage in a counter campaign and say, here is the evidence of the social, economic, health and well-being, societal benefits of education. And I do think that some of the official bodies, the university representative bodies, do make the case. And so you see that both in terms of individual students and fees, but also in the UK in particular, you see that around the contribution that international students make economically. And I'm just not convinced, to be honest, that engaging in that narrative is anything other than it's hard work, and you don't control the narrative. And so big shouty headlines that say 1 in 3 people think university education is a complete waste of time, met with, well, it produces an X% increase in your lifetime salary earnings. It's quite hard, actually. A third thing that we could do is say, actually, we could engage in that narrative and say, we too agree that you definitely shouldn't come. I mean, this is only for some people. If we were selling luxury goods, we'd say, well, we've only got space to take a handful of people. So we could engage in the prospect of trying to actively put people off coming to university and then see whether that makes them more curious about what actually goes on at university. So all three of those are somewhat flippant answers. What I actually think we should do is encourage people to recognize the real value of education and to be really mindful and purposeful about when in their life they want to engage in that. And I do think that there are some people, I was one of them, and I suspect you were too, who came through the schooling system, did well at school, and it was just an obvious thing that if you're bright enough and you want to continue, then the next logical step is to go to university.
So Robert, I just wanted to add here, I would also probably go and say, fine, just like what you've said, these degrees, let's say, are worthless. So what are you going to do? Because not every person who's 18 years old is clear about what they need to do, motivated to go and start a business and become a millionaire in 2-3 years. Because if they have that drive, please go ahead. You don't have to go to university. Actually, some of the most successful people that you and I heard of and read about, Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, they didn't necessarily complete their university, not because they were incapable, but because they were having a great idea and a huge capability, and they were able to do it and complete it without actually finishing their university experience. So I think it's very important to actually look what is the alternative, and of course I'm putting quite a bit of responsibility on us as educators and universities to make this worth it, and also to try to reduce the cost of doing the degree, because it is actually becoming very, very expensive to get that higher education. But I think we need to really flip it in a way and say, so what is next? Because once I was talking to my second son, whom you met, and we were talking about education, and he was telling me, I talk about options and choices and people doing things well, while I'm sort of pushing him through the educational journey. So I said, most of your friends at school, not at the university, if they were given the option, will they go to school or will they stay at home and play computer games? He said, I think most of them, if they were given a choice, they would have just stayed at home and play computer games. I said, now you are of age where you are at university, do you really think it was right to keep a child, giving them the choice of actually, because it's a free world, of not going to school? He said, no, I think it's good that you forced us to go to the university. So to the school. So I think there's all these elements that and I'll stop in a minute to allow you to continue your points, because there was another part to my question. But I think it's actually a responsibility for all of us to make the higher education sector work. This is so important for everybody, not only the economy, but also to the students, to the parents, to the young people. So we can't just simply say, oh, it's a waste of time, and let's just stop doing it. Because what is the alternative is a very important question as well.
So let's think about it from the point of view of the provider and the consumer. So from the point of view of the provider, the university, I think we have to be willing to be a bit more patient and say, when you're ready and when you have reached a point in your life where you really, really want to know more about this subject, come and study with us. We would love to have you. Right? And we also have to be willing to be a bit more disruptive and think, if you've started doing something else and want to study at the same time as doing that something else, or if you want to dip in and out of study, we are still largely set up to come and start at the beginning of the academic year, give us all of your time for the whole of this and the next year and the next year, and then we'll let you go. And we're not so good at pick and mix. And if you think about the way in which we organise a trip, for a family holiday, if you think about the way in which we decide where to go and how to get there and how much to spend and when to start and when to stop, and there's so many choices that are available to us, and we're so used to configuring our own journey and our own packages, but universities are not so good at that. We tend to say, well, if you want to get a degree in this, you come every Tuesday between 9 o'clock and 11:30 for 12 weeks. And then in parallel, you get all these other credits, and that builds your degree. So the flexibility of our model might need to change a bit. And we might need to just be willing to say we will meet the learner when they are ready to meet us, as opposed to standing at the school or college or high school gates and saying, if once you finish that, you just cross the road and come straight into university. However, there's one caveat to that, which is I think the potential student population that we face is made up of, understandably, different groups. So there'll be some people who definitely know, I want to do X. There is a degree that you require to be able to do X, and I've passed all the exams, and I'm now impatient and want to get on and do X at university. And that's brilliant. There's a different demographic that I've just been referring to, which is, I don't really know what I want to do, but I'm going to go off and do some volunteering or start a business or work. And once I've figured out what my passion really is, I'll come back and think, what I really need is a degree in this, because that will help build my career for me. And there's at least a third group which come out of university not clear what they want to do, not clear what they want to work at, and actually for them the joy of just continuing to learn buys them a few years in which to figure out who they are and what they want to do and what their values are. And actually, although they don't go in a very purposeful way, they sometimes come out the other side of that in a very purposeful way. And that could be read as the university as a commercial sector looking to hoover up talented young people who are not sure what they want to do and charge them money whilst they figure it out. And I think that's one reading of it. Another reading is it's creating space in which people learn and grow and develop a sense of purpose. But my overriding view would be that most universities are dealing with a centuries-old habit about how we teach and how we assess, which is a little more flexible than it used to be, but it's not a lot more flexible. And if you think about the way in which I had to buy car insurance last night. If you think about the way in which you consume financial services or holidays or how you plan meals, or we're so used to this amazing range of flexibility and choice in meeting the consumer where they are. I don't think universities really meet the consumer where they are or meet the learner where they are. Not really. And yet, if you look back centuries to when only a small number of people went to university, I think that probably was true. What are you interested in? You build your own degree. That's where all these amazing polymaths who studied a bit of chemistry and a bit of philosophy and a bit of medicine and then invent something that had never been invented before, precisely because they spanned boundaries. In those days, I think universities were ultra flexible places of learning. That's very expensive and very elitist. And as we've become more inclusive and more productive in terms of how many people we can educate at a time, we've become less flexible.
So this is very interesting in the sense that you're almost saying we need to go back to basics, back to where we started, because if you look at the first universities, whether they in the West or in the Islamic world, they were places where few people went there and they were really interested, and some of them went because they were interested in a specific professor who was teaching in a certain way. And I think the challenge maybe for us to re-offer that personalization, re-offer that flexibility and agency and choice, but offer it at scale, because now hopefully we have more experience in running that and running the operation, and we also have technology like AI and other things that could potentially help us, and we need to do this at a reasonable cost to both the learner, to the society. And doing that, we need to do it with the focus on helping people first learn about themselves, discover their purpose, align that purpose to the work that they are doing, and keep them engaged and motivated. Because I think, just like probably you are saying, higher education is such a valuable sector that we can't afford to just lose it. And we need to work together, support it, reform it, and maybe there is a rule for the market mechanisms to allow the right process to or way to emerge and deliver all of these things that we talked about. And I think probably as an advice to a parent or a teacher who's advising young people is to really focus on, if you don't want to do your degree, what else do you plan to do? And if you are willing to write your own strategy, really go and teach yourself the thing that you want to do, then this is a very valuable thing. And I would argue much more difficult than actually going through the university. And at the same, and the other thing that I want to add is that there is a social element to learning and education, and I think that community of learners, which we need to amplify and we need to really put out there, is such an important thing that people, is one thing that I could sit, if I'm highly motivated on my own, learning things from online, from the books, or if I am actually working with a group of people. So while we sounded a bit critical of this come between 9 and 11:30 every Tuesday, but I think the structure has its value as well for certain people. So I think it's flexibility, it's affordability, it's personalization, it is self-discovery, and doing all
But
of
also
that.
community.
And community, absolutely. And doing all of that at a highly affordable way. So good luck to us in all of that, Robert.
And so I'll close with one observation, which you've made me think a little bit. So a few times in this conversation, when we've been talking about the nature of universities and their relationships with students, I have talked about them as consumers and us as providers. And I think there is an economics to that, which is true. But if you think about the learning process, there's a difference between consuming learning and producing learning. And when you were reminiscing with your son as to whether it was a good or a bad idea that he was made to go to school instead of staying at home and playing computer games, well, playing somebody else's computer game is a very passive thing. But if they had chosen to stay at home and learn how to code to produce their own computer games, maybe they'd be off running a successful entrepreneurial startup So the passive nature of consumption is not the same thing as the active nature of producing.
Absolutely. And I'm very biased, of course, because I love universities and some of the most interesting people, I found at universities, whether my students or the colleagues that I work with. And I think universities are a very valuable uh, part of our community and society and need to stay there, of course, in a reformed, improved way. And I welcome the challenge that is thrown at us. But in my biasness, I believe we will still be here and actually to navigate all of that change that is happening. Universities are important because they are, as you rightly said in the beginning, they are not only the place where learning happens, they are also the place where research happens. And I think for the society to own the research, in my view, cannot be only done in private sector because we will be deprived from so many things that researchers at universities actually happily share for free because the society and the state and the community is actually paying for. And I think this is a conversation that we intend to continue and to continue to unpack. And it was good that we had this question from the survey to instigate the conversation that we had just now.
Excellent. Thanks for your time, Mushtak. Great to speak to you as ever.
Great to speak with you. Thank you very much.